The next steps for DeMeco Ryans, they begin now. The pep rally, the press conference, whatever you want to call it, is done. And now it's time to work. It's time to see how him and Nick Caserio blend, which, by the way, if you base it on, just how they seemed at the press conference, which can be a dangerous thing, they seem like they're a pretty good mix. It seems like the New England philosophy with all of Ryan's experience, it seems like it's a good mix. It seems like there's some excitement, and there are a lot of possibilities. The most important position immediately, though, is the quarterback. What are they going to do at quarterback? And I know DeMeco said, you got to build a full team, but if all things are equal, then they're going to draft a quarterback with their first pick in the draft. And that's going to be hopefully the next face of the franchise. I always find it interesting. By the way, it is the Locker Room on YouTube, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, Sports Radio 610, the home of the Texans. We got players, we got coaches, we got ownership, and we're at every game before, after, in the locker room, in the parking lot. So keep it locked here for Texans digital content, and download that Odyssey app to listen on the radio. And I got you covered, and spread the love out. There's going to be a lot more digital coverage with this team because there's a lot of excitement. The funny thing to me about the quarterback, when we start talking about, whether you should draft a quarterback or not, is sometimes we assume that franchise quarterbacks are available in the draft. And talking about whether or not to draft a quarterback turns into a discussion about, well, I'd rather have a franchise quarterback than an all-pro edge guy. And if it were that simple, like if Nick Caserio could just write on a card, all-pro quarterback, and hand it to Roger Goodell, then yeah, I'm sure every GM in the world would rather have the all-pro quarterback than anything else. Sometimes the all-pro quarterback's not available. Sometimes you end up with Ryan Leaf. You end up with Zach Wilson. You end up with Trey Lance before he got hurt. So sometimes it's not that simple. And I think sometimes we start to do that when we start talking draft. Well, they need a lockdown cornerback. Maybe there's not one. Well, they need an all-pro quarterback. Maybe there's not one. Maybe these quarterbacks are just, B caliber, and the defensive guys, the Carters and the Andersons, they're elite. They're Nick Bosa. They're Aaron Donald. So the conversation about which would you rather have, anyone in their right mind would rather have an all-pro franchise quarterback than an edge guy, but sometimes the guy's not there. It's just not available. That's not how the draft works. Now, if you have a specific guy and you want to say, well, I like Bryce Young, or I like CJ Stroud, or I think Will Levis is this, and I think Anthony Richardson could be this. Okay, then we can talk. But you're not breaking any news to anyone when you say, well, I'd rather have a quarterback. You got to have a quarterback to win. That's true. Sometimes he's not there. Maybe they don't think these guys are franchise quarterbacks. Maybe they think there's such a drop-off from the defensive guys down. So I do think it's interesting when we start talking about that. As far as what DeMeco has actually said about the quarterback, the one thing that he said that I think sticks out the most is he doesn't want a statue quarterback. He wants someone that can move around. So that would eliminate any and all Jimmy Garoppolo speculation, I believe. And I'll do a video on veteran quarterback options because I think it's a lot harder for the Texans to get a veteran quarterback than many of us are thinking. And I think there's something that we're kind of ignoring because of how things have gone. And I'll probably do that tomorrow or the next day, talking about veteran options that people throw out there. But really, none of these rookies really fall into the statuesque quarterback role. So that doesn't really eliminate anything. But I think that you can probably eliminate Jimmy Garoppolo from the list, and you probably already have. I would hope so. But that's the one thing I think when we talk about the quarterback is, that we often assume that, you're picking a quarterback over any other position. And the response to that is no kidding. Of course, you would rather have a quarterback. Now, as far as what DeMeco Ryans is looking for, and I think this is significant in free agency. This was him with the drive on Sports Radio 610. Download the Odyssey app. The drive follows us from 2 to 6. If you don't have the Odyssey app, you're fighting an uphill battle when it comes to gathering Texans info. Sports Radio 610's got you covered, specifically 10 to 2. Show of record in the loop and right here digitally. But here is, if you missed it, here's DeMeco Ryans talking about identity and all that type of stuff. And I think this is going to be relevant when it comes to free agency.
The first message to my team, it's about we want to build our team with men who want to swarm, right? And that swarm mentality, it all starts about the swarm is only powerful because they're together. So we want to build our team as a team. It's truly connected. Guys are together and guys who want to hunt together. And if you don't want to be a part of that, right, then Houston, Texas is not a place for you. So it's all about truly a team first mentality, right? Being accountable to our team. That's the first and foremost thing that we have to establish is we're going to do it together and we're going to do it with accountable guys who are all about the team.
Now, when I hear that, I do wonder, we heard him talk about Jalen Petrie. We heard him talk about Stingley. We heard him talk about Christian Harris. I'm intrigued to wonder to hear what he thinks about Christian Kirksey as a player. Kirksey is one of those guys who I think Lovey valued him a lot. I think Caserio valued him in that situation last year. I just wonder, is Christian Kirksey going to be back for sure? Because I could see a situation where DeMeco looks at that and says, we can do a little bit better there. We can get someone that can cover a little bit more ground. God bless him for leaving it all on the field. But I'm really, really intrigued to see and hear and really just watch the decision to find out what DeMeco thinks of Christian Kirksey. That's incredibly interesting. The number one criticism or skepticism, reason for skepticism when it comes to DeMeco Ryans was that he's not an offensive guy. But I think anyone who heard him talk about offensive ball and just the substance in which he talked about it, exotic formations for basic plays, dump offs, which I don't think existed the last few years, all that type of stuff. I think you had to have at least been pleased with how he spoke about offensive football. And here was what he had to say about the type of offense that he's looking for.
In a perfect world, it looks like physical up front, right? Building the offensive line the right way with a physical mindset. We want to establish the run game first and foremost. Like how we play defense and how we want to play offense. We want to attack first. So offensive line, attacking the line of scrimmage, creating knockback, playing physical, and handing the ball to a physical runner like a Damian up here who can really tote the ball, right? That's where we start. That's how you establish the mindset of who we're going to be as a team. It's going to be a physical mindset. So you do that, you has to be in the run game first. So that's where it starts for me, all up front.
And the Dameon Pierce thing is interesting because I think Dameon Pierce, and you heard DeMeco talk about the Elijah Mitchell story, drafting him in the 6th round when there were still linebackers there and him being one of the biggest proponents of it. The other thing is in the 3rd round of that draft, they actually took Trey Sermon, and it didn't end up going according to plan because of injuries. But San Francisco 49ers, they value the running back position. They traded a hell of a haul for Christian McCaffrey. They used their best player in Deebo Samuel as a running back, which led to their success 2 years ago for sure. But they value the running back position, and I think that's only going to help Dameon Pierce because Dameon Pierce is not a guy you want to hand the ball to 300 times a season. He had 220 carries this year. He had 327 in 4 years at Florida. And that's not questioning anything about Dameon Pierce as a ball player. He's just better equipped, and most running backs are, to have someone at least be able to spell him. The Rex Burkhead coming in and, doing whatever the hell he was doing this year, that's just not going to fly. And it really wouldn't fly with Caserio in New England, which makes me wonder, was the Rex Burkhead thing just something about the now and something that they won't do next season? Because New England did an excellent job of having multiple running backs that did multiple things. They drafted Sony Michel in the 1st round when they already had backs. When they had James White catching balls out of the backfield. They had Danny Woodhead. They had Burkhead when he was a multi-skilled winning piece. You go through, they had Kevin Falk, go all the way back to the Kevin Falk days, Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, Corey Dillon. They always had multiple running backs. And if you look at, I think this is the most relatable thing. Like, it's one thing to talk about, use terms like multi-skilled and, multi-dimensional and running backs and stuff like that. But I think the if you play fantasy football, I think you can kind of relate to this. Before the 49ers got Christian McCaffrey, and that's really the only example that I have of like workhorse back. If you look at the Shanahan 49ers and you look at the New England Patriots, how hard is it to draft running backs from New England or San Francisco? It sucks. Like, you get to like the 7th round and you're like, man, this guy had 3 touchdowns in a game last year, but there were 2 games where he didn't carry the ball. Or this guy catches a lot of passes, but this guy's going to score the goal line touchdowns. And you don't know how many carries this guy's going to get. And then you're on the waiver wire and you're like, okay, he had a good game last week. And I'm sure many of you have been burned by this with Shanahan or New England running backs. And you pick them up. And then the very next week after they have a big week, it's like, oh, he had 6 carries for 23 yards. It's really hard to establish. Now, if they have the guy that is capable of carrying the load, they're going to give it to him. So I think if Dameon Pierce, if they feel like they can give it to him, 20 times in a given week, they're going to do it. They're going to feed the hot hand. But they're not going to be married to this guy is going to carry the ball 20 times, and they're going to have enough options to where they don't need him to. So that's the thing that I would that's the thing that I'm intrigued by is how much they value the running back position, what these running backs look like. And if you can spell Dameon Pierce and have him in position to where at the end of a game, rather than him being tired or kind of worn out or, overused, if you're up 6 points or if you're up 7 points and you need to run that 4-minute offense, Dameon Pierce can be kind of the guy that finishes things off and kind of brings that edge and that toughness. He's going to be a massive part of this team for a long, long time. It would just be in their best interest to get some more running backs to help him so that it's even longer than, just a few years. Now, the system is the other thing that comes up as we talk about DeMeco Ryans going back to work. Subscribe, like. It is the Locker Room on YouTube, number one source for daily Texans digital content. The scheme. There's a lot of talk about the scheme. Who's the offensive coordinator going to be? Is DeMeco Ryans married to a scheme? He's been a part of a lot of schemes offensively. What about the scheme?
What I would say about offensive football is it's always ever evolving and ever changing. So I wouldn't box myself into a system because I truly believe in offensive football, defensive football. What do you need to do that particular week to win the game? So it's not about just, oh, we need to run this system. No, what if that team does a really good job of stopping that system? So for me, football scheme is always about being adaptable. So if it's offensive football, yeah, we want to make sure we can hang our hat on certain principles of plays that we like to run, but it's also being able to adjust, being able to adapt, and being able to attack who you're playing against. I love it.
And Clint loves it. The Drive on Sports Radio 610. And that's the most important thing is being able to be adaptable. DeMeco's been familiar with a lot of systems. He talked about Andy Reid. He talked about Chip Kelly, which was actually really revolutionary in the first year in Philadelphia. He was the talk of the league. We've talked about Shanahan. We've talked about Kubiak. We've talked about a lot of guys. So it'll be really interesting to see what he does. The name that has come up the most as an offensive coordinator has been Bobby Slowick. John McClain said he spoke to Kyle Shanahan for like 30 minutes, and he's a big fan of Slowick. Slowick has a father who was one of Kyle Shanahan's main assistants. Slowick started out on defense. Now he's offense. He spent a year working for Pro Football Focus, which a lot of these new age offensive guys actually like as a resource. They don't like it as the gospel, but they like it as a resource. Mike McDaniel in Miami, he mentions Pro Football Focus a lot in his press conferences, just as kind of a guide and all that type of stuff. So keep an eye on Bobby Slowick. And they've also interviewed a couple people, but I think that's the guy to look out for. And Kyle Shanahan has a lot of good things to say about him. And there's a lot of good things to say about DeMeco Ryans. But we'll see what happens with free agency. with current players on the team. What's he going to think of Christian Kirksey, quarterback position? I think we can scratch Jimmy Garoppolo off of the list, and then offensive philosophy and how he blends with Nick Caserio, which, quite honestly, I wanted to go watch Step Brothers or Bad Boys 2 after I watched DeMeco and Nick on stage. That was really, really fun. Final thing I want to touch on, and this is something that I think has just been annoying around here, is DeMeco Ryans' relationship with the McNair family and what he thinks of the McNairs and what brought him here. Because a lot has been said, some fair, a lot unfair. But here was DeMeco Ryans talking about that.
Yeah, it was huge because I know the McNair family, and I'm thankful for the McNair family, as I told them, for the opportunity that they gave me, right, as a young 21-year-old being drafted here to change the trajectory of my family. Right? And I know who they are. I know the people that they are. I know what they represent. So I know this is a good organization led by great owners, right? And whatever it is, we got put into a bad light over the past few years, but it's not about what happened in the past. It's like, what are we going to do moving forward? But knowing who the people are and knowing how genuine they are in their hearts, it makes it even easier decision.
Yeah, he knows the McNairs better than anyone. He knows it more than a lot of the talking heads that go on TV and say what they say. And he chose this situation. He said whatever it is. I think it's a lot of things. I think a lot of it is deserved criticism. I think trust in the POS, person of service. Jack Easterby didn't help. He's a snake. He's a slime ball. I think a lot of narratives that were created during a vulnerable time at the end of Bob McNair's tenure that really they couldn't be defended as much because they were just going to be pounced on. I think that has a little bit to do with it. And I think those narratives have kind of gone away with DeMeco Ryans coming here, a guy who knows the McNairs better than anyone, a guy who had a lot of options, a guy who didn't just take the money. Denver could have given him more money. So it damn sure wasn't that. So I guess the narrative kind of goes away. But when he says whatever it was, I think you can mix in trusting the wrong people. You can mix in the POS. That's probably a large chunk. That's probably the protein of the stew. And then, I think there was a lot of unfair silliness that was thrown on these people. And if you talk to people who actually know them, the McNairs, you can say what you want, and there's been deserved criticism, but I think some of that was really unfair, especially at the end of Bob McNair's tenure in life. But it's a thing of the past, right? It's a thing of the past. So better days are ahead, and the most important days are in the next 3 months. What's DeMeco Ryans going to do free agency wise? Who do the Texans like? Who do they want to bring back? Who's going to be the offensive coordinator? Who's going to be the quarterback? What are they going to do with the other draft equity? It's a fun time to be alive. It's a fun time to cover this squad. It's a fun time to check into the locker room, number one source for daily Texans digital content, and it's a fun time to listen to Sports Radio 610 on the Odyssey app because better days are ahead. The vibes are great. Everything's good. Nothing's guaranteed, but there is one guarantee. No matter what happens, we are all in this together. Have a good weekend.